All right, so what you're about to watch is my first ever motion design course, How to Make Dope Animated Loops Volume 1. This is a beginner course, you don't need any outside knowledge, and we're going to make this sneaky letter animation from start to finish, designing in Illustrator or Photoshop, animating in After Effects, and then rendering it out. The course is several years old at this point, but the course content is still rock solid. Even though I am a little bit dopey in it, I was in college, give me a break. This course is targeted for beginners. It's a really good beginner course. A lot of amazing projects have come out of it. A lot of people have enjoyed it and rated it very highly. This is a re-upload from Skillshare. It's not really edited. You might see some references to Skillshare, so don't get confused. And I hope that you enjoy it too. So without further ado, please enjoy How to Make Dope Animated Loops Volume 1.
Hello, YouTube people. Welcome to class. I hope you're excited to create a sneaky, creepy letter peek with me. Before hopping into design, there are two things you'll want to create. First, you'll want to create a mood board. I like to use Pinterest because it's easy to use and supports GIFs. This will help you figure out what kind of colors, textures, motion moves, and general feelings you want to evoke with your piece. And next, you will want to make a rough sketch or storyboard. Normally, a storyboard is multiple frames, but I'm lazy and thought I could capture this in one frame. It doesn't have to be anything special. You can make some simple notes about what kind of moves you want to make. And once you do this, we are ready to start designing. All right, so let's get started. I'm going with a sneaky N for Nick. And I'm not a particularly great sketcher, but maybe yours will look a lot better. So a couple things we want to do before we dive in. We want to figure out a color palette. And if you are doing a letter thing, you want to figure out a font. So a couple resources online we can do. Color Lovers is a great place for color palettes. This guy, Mr. Pugo on Instagram, puts up great color palettes. Love him. Coolers is a great site. You can just press spacebar until you find something you like. I've already found this color palette ahead of time, which I'm going to use. And Adobe Fonts, if you have a Creative Cloud membership, is a great place to look for fonts. So I'm going to use this font, Oh No Blazeface, because it has a ton of weights, so this is going to make the morph very easy. So we can morph from a thin weight, this 12-point font, to a thick weight, this 72-point font, very easily. So if you're doing a morph, you want to look for a font that has a lot of weights. Okay, so for a color palette, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot of this, and I'm going to paste this into Illustrator. And with this selected, I'm going to go to Image Trace, 6 colors. And when that happens, click Expand. So now these are vector shapes. And then New Color Group. So now these are all color swatches. And now we can go ahead and delete this. We don't need that anymore. Now we're ready to get started illustrating. So the background, I'm going to go with this dark blue color. And if you're following along in Photoshop, just keep in mind that you want to break everything apart onto separate layers. Because if you're doing this in Illustrator, you can do it later, but Photoshop, you want to do it as you go. Now I want to make my N shape. So let's make it this reddish color. And I'll make it the thick one, thick N. Make it pretty big. And center this. And I'll call this layer N thick. Maybe a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to call this one N thin. And I'm going to make this one the 12-point font. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert both of these ends to outlines because I don't need them as text anymore. I want them as live shapes. Create these to outlines, and you'll see why later. So now what I'm going to do is create another new layer, and let's make the eyeball. So get the ellipse tool. Whoops. And we're going to create an eyeball to make it this tannish color. And we'll grab pen tool and this anchor point, and we're going to click on the edges here. It looks a little wonky right now, but we'll grab the top, drop it down a little bit, bottom, bring it up a little bit, mess with these handles till we get something that's looking a little more like an eyeball. That's looking a little better. Maybe bring it down a little more. That's pretty good. Call this layer eyeball. Make another layer on top. And make this one green. Call this one iris. Duplicate this again. Make this blue. Make it a little smaller. Call this one pupil. And then we'll duplicate this one more time. Drag it off to the side here. Make it this eyeball color. Okay. And looks pretty good. Call this one eye shine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make another new layer, but we're going to grab all these elements here, copy them, and then paste them onto this layer. And we just need all of these on one new layer because this is just a reference layer. They don't need to all be separated because we're just going to animate this eye one time and then duplicate it later. So they don't need to all be separated again. I'm going to lock this and just play around with where I want these positioned. Right there is pretty good. So now let's make the hand. Let's call this layer second eye. Now let's make the hand layer. Get the rounded rectangle tool, make it this orange. Make one of these fingers, and I want this to be more rounded, so I'm going to grab these corners here. Rotate this. Alt drag it here. Command D, Command D. These hands are looking a little big for this guy. And then once again, I'm going to break all these fingers into individual layers because they're going to want to be animated separately. So let's go ahead and do this. Then name them for your future self. Finger 1. Finger 2, finger 3, finger 4. Then one more time, we're going to make a new layer, copy all of these, do 4, Control C, then paste them onto here. And this layer, once again, is just for reference because we're just going to duplicate the actions later. I think that looks pretty good. So let's save this. And design V2. I'm going to pretend like I haven't already made this end before and save it. All right. Now we're ready to animate this. All right. So now we're ready to import our file into After Effects. Let's go to File, Import File. Find our file. and make sure you are importing as composition retain layer sizes. Now let's double click into our comp here. And we want to break this into chunks. So let's start with our eyeball here and double click or highlight all of our eye layers, and let's right click and pre-compose. Call this an eye. And now we have an eyeball comp. And let's double click into here. And the first thing I want to do to kind of tidy this up is I'm going to click this region of interest button and draw a nice little box around this eye, and go up here and click crop comp to region of interest. And this will just make our bounding area a little bit tighter. So I want to start this off with the eyelid kind of opening up and blinking. So to do that, I want to convert this layer into a shape layer. Since I made this in Illustrator, it can kind of read that shape layer data. So I'm going to right click this eyeball layer and click create shapes from vector layer. And if you did this in Photoshop, or for some reason this button isn't working, then you might have to create a new shape layer and just draw this with kind of recreate this layer with a pen tool. But I'm not going to do that since mine works. So let's open up this contents here and make a keyframe for the path. Let's go ahead, maybe 10 frames, and make another keyframe. And now go back to the first one and bring down the eyelid so that the top and bottom are meet at the middle so that it's closed. And now if you play this spacebar, you can see it opens up. But we want to add some easing here so that it looks a little bit nicer. So if you easy ease this second keyframe with F9, you know, it'll look a little bit better. But I want some more exaggerated ease, so I'm going to click the graph editor and ease this more. Let's see here. Not like that. Not like that either. So I'm going to do this. I actually prefer working with numbers, so if I hit Command-Shift-K, you can see easy ease is 33%, and I want this to be something higher, like 69%. And there we go. That looks a lot better. And then maybe after a few more frames, it will blink back down. You can copy this first keyframe and paste it back down. And you want the blinks to slap down. So they're going to have this linear keyframe and they open back up. This one should be 69 too. When they open back up, they have this easing, and when they slap back down, they have this linear keyframe because you want them to be fast. Kind of like this. Let's see what that looks like. So I think that looks pretty good for right now. So how do we get the rest of the eyeball layers to be masked by this layer? So we could, duplicate this and have them matte each time, but that's kind of a sloppier way to do it because then we'll have to have a bunch of layers. So better way to do it is to apply an effect called set matte to each one of these layers. So with this effect, then we will choose the eyeball outlines for each one and make sure that you have this button right here, continuously rasterize, selected. So let's copy this effect, set matte for each one, boom, boom. So now, and make sure that's highlighted, when the eyeball opens and closes, it's going to hide each layer. So now we have the eyeball opening, blinking, beautiful. So now what we want to do is we want the eyeball to look around. So let's right click here and create a new null object and parent the iris, pupil, and eye shine to this null object. And we'll call this pupil control. And I like to write things in all caps sometimes because it makes it seem more serious. And I'm a very serious animator. So now when we move this around, everything is going to look with it. Beautiful. So how about once the eyelid opens up for the first time, make a position keyframe, and we'll have the eye start looking around, like right here. So right about here, make it start like go like this, and then like that. And I'm going to try to kind of keep these in line with these keyframes. I feel like that might make it look a little bit better. And then once again, you can either easy ease these with F9, but I don't think that's going to look as good. I don't think easy ease is really the best easing. I'm hitting Command-Shift-K again to bring this up. I think that a little bit higher of a number usually looks a little bit better. So that's pretty good for right now, but I want this to keep going. So I'm going to just make a few more here. Maybe to 10 seconds, and then it'll look back. Let's see how this looks. And then maybe like when this comes back to the center, we could have the pupil kind of squint, like it's judging you. Well, maybe something like this. Make sure that these are eased properly. Sometimes it defaults back to 16, which looks a little funky. I want this to really squint. And then at the very end, it goes back. Let's say at 10 seconds, the loop is over. And this blinks back. So now we'll go back to here, and where our second eye layer is, if we, with the second eye layer highlighted, if we alt drag this eye onto it, it'll replace. And now, whoops, let's move it over a little bit. Move this one up a little bit. Now we have two eyes that open up and look around. I mean, that's a pretty good start for right now. We can always go back and adjust them a little bit, but I like the way this loop looks. So I'm gonna go to 10 seconds where our loop ends, and I'm gonna click N, and now that brings our work area in. All right, so the next chunk that we wanna do is we wanna make this N morph out. So once again, we want to make this into a shape from a vector layer. So we'll right click and do that. And we also want to do that for the thin layer. And we can go ahead and delete the old ones. We don't need those. So I'm going to grab the thick layer, and I'm clicking Control Squiggly, whatever that button is called. I don't think anybody actually knows. And that will bring down all of the options here. And I'm going to make a keyframe on the path. And now I'm going to copy this keyframe. And I'm going to do the same for the thin one. Open up the path, make a keyframe. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the thick one. So now on the thin one, I made it path keyframe, I'm going to go ahead maybe 1 second, and I'm going to paste the keyframe that I copied from the thick one. And now you can see that it opens up here. And I'm going to solo this layer, so that's all that I see right now. And look at that, it's opening up. And let's go ahead and we can ease this, and if we want to, we can open up the graph editor, maybe make this a little bit more extreme, like that. But once again, I'm weird, and I like using numbers. This way I can keep everything the same for later, and it makes matching up the easings easier. And if for some reason your shape is doing a weird flippy thing like this, if it's for some reason doing a flip like that, you want to go in and look for the one point that's bigger than the other one. So in this case, it's here, and make sure that the other point, they're matched up. So see how this one is big and this one is big? So I'm going to go ahead and now click on this point and set this to be the first vertex and this one to be the first vertex. And that way, that should fix the flipping. But if you do it with the fonts the way that I had it set up, you shouldn't have the flippiness. But a lot of times After Effects is annoying and likes to make your shapes flip, so that should fix it. All right. So let's unhide this layer, and maybe we'll move the eyes about 10 seconds forward so the shape can open up and then the eyes come out. That's pretty good. All right, and now we're ready to work on the hand. All right, so the idea for the hands is that we want them to kind of come out of this space in the end and then push it out. So what we're gonna wanna do is maybe push, we need a little bit of dead time where the N isn't doing anything so the hands can come out of this space. So let's actually push these forward a little bit, maybe 10 or so frames here to give these fingers time to come out. Wait, let's see. That should probably be enough time. We can always adjust it later. And I've actually been a bad boy and I didn't name all my layers, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Background, and I can delete this thick layer. I don't need that anymore. And this other hand layer, I don't need that anymore. Go ahead, delete that, and I'm going to save again. You should be saving constantly. After Effects loves to crash. Okay, so now let's add some keyframes to these fingers. So we want to keyframe their final position, and we'll do that. We'll make 3 keyframes without doing anything. They're one position here, one position here, and then one position for their final one. And then we'll work backwards. So we have the final position. We have here, which is where they first start pushing. So we're going to go in and push them back to about here. And then we'll go back again. And then this is where they kind of come out of nothing. And we're going to go and I'm going to Command-Shift-K, and I'm going to type in 0, 69, 0, 69. So now, if you look at it, they're going to come out and they're going to push like that. And I will also want to add some slight scale to these. So with these selected, press S, and let's add some. And if you press U, that will open up all the keyframes that you have on your layers. So I'm going to add some scale properties to these as well. So they're going to reach 100% scale right here, and we'll go back to here, and maybe they're at 90 right here. And once again, I'm going to 0, 69, 0, 6. If you're curious about why I'm using these numbers, these are just numbers that I really enjoy, and I think that they pretty much always look good. So I like hard keyframes when they kind of come out of nothing or off screen, and then these ease keyframes when they come into the action. That's basically an idea for how these moves should work. And now look like that. And then one more thing we want to do here is we want to kind of fade these on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add we could mess with their opacity, but what I want to do here is I want to match this color. So I'm going to right-click the layer and add a color overlay and match my color here. And I'm going to then change this opacity. So it's going to go from 100 to 0. And once again, I want to ease this. 69, 0, 69. And then we can just copy, Control-C, copy that to each one. Oops. What you want to do is you want to copy the actual effect here, and then you can paste it to each layer. And now it looks pretty good like that. And I'm going to stagger each layer's one frame like this. And make sure that it kind of might have to move the whole thing over like forward slightly so that it looks like it matches the pacing of the end growing out. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to pre-compose these. Call this hand. And now I'm just going to duplicate this, Control D. If you notice me saying command a lot, it's because I also work on Macs all the time, so I can't keep my key commands straight. And I'm going to rotate this. If you click W, you get your rotation tool. I'm going to rotate this around and put this in a good place here. Make sure it looks right. That doesn't look right. Doesn't look right at all. Might have to rotate this a little bit. I'm just going to play with this until it looks good. Still not looking right. Why won't this look right? That looks good. All right. So now we need to do a few things to get this looping right. We're going to go in to our hand comp, and this is about 2 seconds and 8 frames length here. And to make it simple, we're just going to say this is 3 seconds because that's easier math, and math is for nerds, and I don't like making it difficult. So let's just say 3 seconds. So we're going to go to time remapping. Then let's make a keyframe here. And since we're going with a 10-second comp, we'll say 3 seconds less than 10 is 7. And we'll make a keyframe here. One frame before that. So now, here, we're going to copy this keyframe, paste it here, and then copy the first keyframe, which is 0, and paste it at the end. So now what happens is it's just going to basically play, and once it hits 7 seconds, now it's just going to play in reverse like that. And we can copy basically these time remapping keyframes and paste it on the other one. So if you play it through, this is what it's going to look like. But we also have to do this for the end. So the end animation happens, it goes 10 frames in, and then this animation is about 1 second long. So let's go 10 frames back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's about 9 seconds. We'll grab this keyframe, copy it, then go 1 second back. From 9 to 8. That doesn't look right though. I think it should just be about here. I'm looking at the hands here. Should be about there. Wait a second, I grabbed the wrong keyframes. Duh. There we go. All right. I'm going to save this. And then one more problem is our eyes. Our eyes don't close soon enough. So I'm going to make the eyes shut much sooner. The eyes should shut at about right here. So if we click in here, this is when the eyes need to close. So I'm going to move this back. And have it happen about right here. Let's see if that looks better. Still not quick enough. Let's bring this keyframe in more, like here. That looks better. And you can see that this still, we're having some weirdness right here. So right when this eye closes, that frame, I'm going to trim this. Alt bracket, bring it back one more. So now right when the eye closes, they're gone. But I have to do that for both eyes. Now let's watch this whole thing. Beautiful. And I think we don't want this to just play again right away. So let's, and also we want this, if you watch the time remapping codes, these are just going to start playing again. So watch here. It wants to keep going. That's because we have these keyframes that happen over here. So I have to delete this keyframe. Otherwise they're going to kind of rebound. So I'm also going to trim these right here. And let's make it so that this animation doesn't just loop again. Let's have it go on for a few frames to just give it a second before it loops. There we go. All right, now it's time to move on to my favorite part of this, the texturing and final touches. All right, let's add some texture to the eyeballs first. So I'm going to click into my eye comp and let's open up this eyeball here. I'm going to put on full res just so I can see it a little bit better. And let's start with the eyeball. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to go to layer style, bevel and emboss. Drop down the bevel and emboss. I'm going to crank up the size a little bit. And I'm going to put both of these colors at dissolve. Dissolve. And I want to pick a color. First, I'm just going to eyedrop the same color as this. And then I want to make the highlights slightly lighter and the shadow slightly darker. And that gives it just a nice little texture that is the same style as my illustration. All right, and I'm going to copy this bevel and emboss to the iris. And the colors aren't right, but this just makes it a little bit quicker. And I want to grab this. Maybe I'll do the shadow to be this blue. No, that's too dark. I hate that. Make the highlight a little bit lighter. The shadow just a little bit darker. Copy this again. And we'll put it on the pupil. A little bit lighter. Make the shadow a little darker. That looks pretty good. But now there's a little problem here. This highlight is is being a little weird now. It doesn't really look like a highlight anymore. It looks like just a shape on top. So now what we actually need to do is we need to make this a mask of these. So I'm going to make this an alpha layer. So with the pupil, I'm going to click alpha matte inverted. And I'm going to duplicate the eye shine one more time. And I'm going to make the iris alpha matte inverted of that as well. Now that's actually a cutout of those two. And that's exactly what we want. Great. And now both of our eyes have some nice texturing to them. Now let's go into the hand and do the same thing. We'll grab this one and we will add a bevel and emboss. I think it's still copied, so we can just paste it on. Right, beautiful. I'm gonna go over to grab this color, grab this color. Let's make it a little bit lighter. Make this one a little bit darker. And maybe mess with the angle a little bit. Make sure that it's how we want it. But the problem here is that this is going to look weird because this is supposed to be hidden in here. So we're getting this kind of weirdness. So let's keyframe this opacity, the shadow opacity and the highlight opacity, so that it doesn't appear until these things appear. So we'll go make these down at 0 and 0. And I'll just ease these. Whoops. Go away. F9. And now we can copy and paste this bevel and emboss to each of these and make sure you do it when the layer starts. And let's see how this looks in the main layer. I think that looks pretty good. Let's just make sure. Cool. I like that. Maybe, let's see what else we can add here. Maybe we can add a shadow underneath this N. Maybe right here, this N wants to have some kind of stylized shadow. So I'm going to make a shape layer and drag it underneath the N. And let's add an effect called, we'll go over here to our effects and presets. Let's add an effect called scatter. And this is just going to scatter these pixels around. And if you click randomize every frame, it will kind of make these jump around. I don't know if I really like this, but maybe it needs to be a darker color like this. And maybe I'll call this N shadow. And maybe this needs to be duplicated over here too. It's kind of cool. I'm not totally sold on it, but it's a little interesting. Maybe we want to create a new adjustment layer over top, and maybe we want to add some noise to everything. Maybe you want to add maybe 10% noise. I don't like to use colored noise. This is too much noise. I don't need that much noise in my life. Maybe we want to see what that looks like. Maybe 5% noise. Maybe we can add a little more movement to this. So let's create a new solid. And we'll call this turbulent noise. And then we're going to add a new effect called, you guessed it, turbulent noise. And we want to bump up the contrast a bit. And then we want to drop down the evolution options here and alt click random seed. And we're going to type in time times 6. And what this does is it creates a new, it kind of creates this randomly created pattern each time. The higher number you do, the faster it goes. The lower number you do, the slower it generates. And now what we're going to do with this pattern is we're going to hide this. And if we create another new adjustment layer and we apply an effect called displacement map. Whoa, that's not what we want. And we choose the turbulent noise and we put on luminance and luminance. Now we get this kind of, why isn't that working? Is it working? Oh, because we have to pre-compose this. Duh. Pre-compose this. Turbulent noise comp. Move all attributes in. And now we get this kind of jiggly effect. That's happening. That's way too aggressive, way more than we want. Let's name this layer displacement map. Maybe 2 and 2. And now it's kind of has a little more jiggly movement. I don't know if this is right for the vibe here, but I figured I would show it to you. So yeah, I think that's about it. All right, now I'm ready to render. So I'm going to go up here to composition with this composition selected and add to Adobe Media Encoder. If for whatever reason you don't have Adobe Media Encoder, then you would just do add to render queue. But this is my preferred way to render. So once I click that, it's going to get loaded into Adobe Media Encoder. So I'm going to choose my output, which is my renders folder. And I'll save it there. And I'll choose my format, which is going to be which is going to be H.264, since I'm just going to put this on Instagram most likely. I don't really care too much about quality. I just want it to be fast and small size. Don't need audio. All this other stuff is fine. And then we're good to go. Then once it's done, I can just click this, open it up. And let's check it out. Look at that. It's beautiful. So you guys just render out like this and show me what you make. Thank you so much for making it this far. I hope you had a good time, maybe even learned something. This was my first Skillshare class, so I would love to know your feedback about it. things you liked, things you didn't like. Let me know. And if it really sucked, let me know and I'll never do it again. Thanks.
What